On a gray morning in May 1945, as Soviet artillery hammered the ruins of Berlin and American GIs stood on the banks of the Elbe River, the most destructive regime in human history drew its final breath. The Nazi war machine that had consumed Europe in fire and blood was finally defeated. Its cities were rubble. Its people were starving. Its territory was carved into zones of occupation. Germany, the industrial giant that had nearly conquered the continent twice in 30 years, ceased to exist as a sovereign nation. But buried in those ruins was a question that would haunt the next 8 decades. What do you do with a nation that had proven itself capable of industrialized genocide? How do you ensure that German power, German efficiency, German technological brilliance never again becomes an instrument of mass death? The answer, crafted in the occupied cafes of Frankfurt and the guarded conference rooms of Washington, was radical. Germany would be rebuilt. It would be rearmed. It would become one of the richest and most advanced nations on Earth. But it would never be allowed to possess the ultimate weapon, the atomic bomb. Today, Germany stands as the 4th largest economy in the world. It manufactures some of the planet's most sophisticated machinery. It hosts American nuclear weapons on its own soil. Its air force is trained to deliver those weapons in war. German scientists work on nuclear physics. German industry enriches uranium. And yet, Germany itself does not have and will never have its own nuclear arsenal. This isn't an accident of history. It isn't a temporary situation waiting to change. It's the result of a deliberate architecture of control, built layer by layer over decades, designed to make it legally impossible, politically unthinkable, and strategically unnecessary for Germany to go nuclear. To understand why, we have to go back to the moment when the atomic age was born and Germany's place in it was decided not by Germans, but by the victors who stood over its corpse. When the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the world entered a new era. The weapon that ended the war in the Pacific was unlike anything that had come before. A single bomb carried by a single plane could erase an entire city. Warfare had been transformed. Suddenly, the nation that possessed these weapons held the power of apocalypse in its hands. In the immediate aftermath of the German surrender, the Allies discovered something unsettling. The Nazis had been working on their own atomic program. German physicists, some of the best minds in the field, had been racing to unlock the same terrible power. They had failed. Not because they lacked the knowledge, but because they lacked the resources and the time. The Nazi regime had poured its industrial capacity into rockets and jets and conventional weapons. The atomic bomb remained theoretical, a dream on a blackboard. But the Allied intelligence officers who sifted through the wreckage understood the implications. If Germany had won the race, if Hitler had possessed nuclear weapons in 1944 or 1945, the world would have faced an existential nightmare. The conclusion was inescapable. Germany could never again be allowed to approach that threshold. The first layer of control was the most brutal. Germany was occupied, divided into 4 zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Every aspect of German life was supervised by foreign powers. The German government didn't exist. German sovereignty was a legal fiction. The Allies controlled the factories, the universities, the research institutes. They controlled what could be built, what could be studied, and what could be imagined. In the immediate post-war years, the Allies dismantled Germany's heavy industry. They seized patents. They confiscated research. They arrested German scientists and brought them to Washington and Moscow to work on Allied weapons programs. Germany was being deliberately de-industrialized, stripped of the capacity to ever again threaten the peace. But history had other plans. The wartime alliance between the Western powers and the Soviet Union collapsed almost the moment the guns fell silent. By 1947, the Iron Curtain had descended across Europe. Germany, the defeated enemy, suddenly became the front line of a new conflict, the Cold War. The Americans and the Soviets both realized they needed Germany. The Soviets turned their occupation zone into a communist satellite state, the German Democratic Republic. The Americans, British, and French merged their zones into the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. Both Germanys were rearmed. Both were integrated into opposing military alliances. But the question of nuclear weapons was handled very differently. In the East, the Soviets kept absolute control. East Germany was never given nuclear weapons. It was never even allowed to pretend it might have them. The Soviet nuclear umbrella covered East Berlin, but the weapons remained firmly in Soviet hands, stored on Soviet bases, controlled by Soviet officers. The German Democratic Republic was a puppet state, and puppets don't get to hold the strings of annihilation. In the West, the situation was more complicated. West Germany was being rebuilt as a democratic, capitalist bulwark against Soviet expansion. The Americans poured billions of dollars into the German economy through the Marshall Plan. German factories roared back to life. The economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder, transformed West Germany from a smoking ruin into an industrial powerhouse in less than a decade. But there was a condition. West Germany would join NATO. It would contribute troops to the Western Alliance, but it would never develop its own nuclear weapons. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a legal commitment embedded in treaties that West Germany had to sign to regain any measure of sovereignty. In 1954, when West Germany was allowed to rearm and join NATO, it signed the Paris Agreements. Buried in those agreements was a renunciation. West Germany voluntarily and permanently forswore the production of nuclear weapons on its territory. The word voluntarily is doing a lot of work in that sentence. West Germany had no leverage. It was still occupied. American, British, and French troops were stationed across the country. The government in Bonn existed because Washington allowed it to exist. Signing the treaty wasn't a choice. It was the price of admission back into the community of nations. But the Americans understood something important. Telling Germany it could never have nuclear weapons while simultaneously asking it to fight on the front line of World War III if it ever came was a difficult sell. German soldiers were expected to face Soviet tank divisions. German cities would be the first to burn if the Cold War turned hot. But Germany itself would have no say over the ultimate deterrent. The solution was nuclear sharing. The United States would station nuclear weapons on German soil. German pilots would be trained to deliver those weapons. German officers would be integrated into NATO's nuclear planning. In a war, German F-104 starfighters would carry American B-61 bombs toward Soviet targets. But the weapons themselves, the warheads, the codes, and the authority to launch, all of that remained American. The bombs sat in vaults guarded by American soldiers. The final decision rested in Washington. It was a clever compromise. Germany was inside the nuclear tent, but it wasn't holding the matches. It gave German politicians the ability to tell their public that Germany was protected, that it had a role in deterrence, without actually giving Germany the one thing the rest of the world was determined it must never have: independent nuclear capability. But the legal architecture didn't stop there. In 1968, the world came together to sign the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT. It was a grand bargain. The 5 nations that already had nuclear weapons, the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China, would keep them. Everyone else would agree never to develop them. In exchange, the nuclear powers promised to eventually disarm and to share peaceful nuclear technology. West Germany signed the NPT in 1969 and ratified it in 1975. By doing so, Germany legally committed itself, in a binding international treaty, never to acquire nuclear weapons. This wasn't just a promise to the Americans or the Soviets, it was a promise to the entire world. And because the treaty has no expiration date, it's a promise that binds Germany forever, or at least until the treaty itself collapses. The NPT was the second layer of the cage. The first layer was NATO in the postwar agreements. The second was the global non-proliferation regime. But there was a third layer, the most important of all, the psychology of the German people themselves. The memory of the Second World War, of the Holocaust, of the total moral catastrophe of the Nazi regime, became the defining trauma of modern German identity. In the decades after the war, German society engaged in a painful, ongoing process of reckoning with its past. The education system drilled into every German child the horrors of what had been done in their nation's name. Memorials to the victims of the Holocaust were built across the country. The phrase, "never again," became not just a slogan, but a civic religion. This created a political culture that was fundamentally allergic to militarism. The German peace movement became one of the most powerful in the world. The idea of German rearmament, even within NATO, was controversial. The idea of Germany developing nuclear weapons was beyond controversial. It was taboo. To advocate for German nuclear weapons was to invite immediate political destruction. It was to align yourself, in the public imagination, with the darkest chapter of the nation's history. In 1990, when the Berlin Wall fell and Germany reunified, the question briefly flickered again. Would a united Germany, no longer occupied, no longer divided, reconsider its nuclear status? The answer was swift and unequivocal: no. The reunification treaty, signed by East and West Germany and blessed by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, reaffirmed Germany's commitment to remain non-nuclear. The newly unified Germany ratified the NPT again. It signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It became one of the loudest voices in international forums calling for global disarmament. Germany wasn't just accepting its non-nuclear status, it was embracing it. It was turning the restriction into a virtue, claiming moral leadership on disarmament precisely because it had renounced the bomb. But the story doesn't end with legal treaties and historical guilt. There's a fourth layer, the coldest and most pragmatic of all. Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons because it doesn't need them. Germany is protected by the American nuclear umbrella. NATO's Article 5 states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. That means an attack on Germany is an attack on the United States. And And the United States has thousands of nuclear weapons. From Germany's perspective, why bear the political, financial, and diplomatic cost of building its own arsenal when it already has access to the most powerful one on Earth? Building a nuclear weapons program from scratch is staggeringly expensive. It requires uranium enrichment facilities, plutonium reactors, warhead design, delivery systems, submarines or missiles, and a secure command and control infrastructure. It would cost tens of billions of dollars. It would require decades. And every step of the way, Germany would face international condemnation, economic sanctions, and the possible collapse of the European Union, which is built on the principle of trust between former enemies. For what? To have a smaller, less capable arsenal than the one it already has access to through NATO? The math doesn't work, but there's a deeper reason, one that touches on the nature of power in the 21st century. Germany's strength doesn't come from military force, it comes from economic dominance and political influence. Germany is the economic engine of the European Union. It shapes EU policy. It sets the rules for trade, finance improving, and regulation across a continent. That power is more useful, more flexible, and more sustainable than a nuclear arsenal sitting in a silo. Germany learned the lesson of the 20th century better than almost any other nation. Military conquest is a dead end. Total war is a civilizational suicide pact. True power in the modern world comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to build, to trade, to integrate, and to lead without firing a shot. And yet, the world is changing. In recent years, cracks have appeared in the architecture that kept Germany non-nuclear for 8 decades. The United States, under different administrations, has questioned its commitment to NATO. American politicians have suggested that Europe should pay more for its own defense, that the nuclear umbrella might not be as reliable as it once was. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, has become increasingly aggressive, invading Ukraine, threatening the Baltics, and rattling its nuclear saber. In 2022, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Germany announced a massive increase in defense spending. The German government committed to spending over 100 billion euros to modernize its military. German tanks, which hadn't fired a shot in anger since 1945, were sent to Ukraine. The pacifist consensus that had defined German politics for generations began to crack, and in the background, quietly, a debate has begun, not in public, not in parliaments, but in think tanks, in academic journals, in the private conversations of defense planners. The question is being asked again for the first time in decades. Should Germany reconsider? The arguments are always framed carefully. No one is advocating for Germany to build nuclear weapons, but people are asking whether Germany should develop the capability to build them quickly if it ever needed to, whether it should hedge, whether it should keep the option open. So far, the answer remains no. The legal barriers are still in place, the political will doesn't exist, the public would revolt. And the Americans, despite their occasional grumbling, have shown no sign of withdrawing their nuclear guarantee. But history teaches us that forever is a long time. The treaties that bind Germany were written in a world that no longer exists. The Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is gone, the generation that lived through the Second World War is dying. The memory that shaped German identity is fading into history. What happens when the guilt fades? What happens if the American umbrella closes? What happens if the world enters a new age of great power competition, and Germany finds itself surrounded by nuclear-armed rivals with no protector? These are not hypothetical questions. They are the questions that will define the next chapter of European security. For now, Germany remains non-nuclear, not because it lacks the technology, not because it lacks the money, but because it made a choice, or had a choice made for it, 80 years ago in the ruins of a war it started and lost. That choice has held. It has become law, culture, and identity. But choices can be unmade. Treaties can be broken. And history, as Germany knows better than most, has a way of returning when you least expect it. Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons because the world decided it never would. The question is whether the world can hold that line forever, or whether, someday, the logic of survival will demand a different answer.